The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Nathan Alfred Insurance, an independent insurance agency located in Vienna, West Virginia. They specialize in auto, home, life, and business insurance. And what makes this agency unique is your ability to shop the market. The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Planet Fitness. You can come and check out their new and improved Planet Fitness. Now, I'm a member of Planet Fitness, and they have all new strength equipment. They have tanning beds, rowing machines, and so much more. Starting at just $10 a month, you can join Planet Fitness, home of the judgment-free zone, where members experience a hassle-free, non-intimidating environment. So please, see club or visit planetfitness.com for more information. Now, you can help support the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells as low as $1 per month. You can go to www.patreon.com/Bully Resistance Show. That's www.p as in Paul, A, T as in Tom, REON as in Nancy.com/Bully Resistance Show. So for more information, go to www.davebond.org. That's www.davebond.org.
Welcome, everyone, to the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells, nationally known smooth jazz artist, CEO and co-founder of the Chocolate Jazz Foundation, and the co-host of a 2-hour syndicated radio program called Chocolate Jazz Radio. Bully Resistance is a weekly 1-hour show that's a motivational, informative, and inspirational program. We will have interviews with musicians, actors, government officials, politicians, psychologists, counselors, and just average day citizens. Of course, the topics will include making right choices, never giving up desire, discipline, determination, bullying in public schools or workplace and in your community, bully resistance and prevention, self-defense, jiu-jitsu, and current affairs, and much, much more. And if you're ready, we are. Here's your host, David Wells.
I want to thank everyone for tuning into another episode of the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. My name is David, and today we have a special guest that's just not a professional bass player. He's a writer, producer. He owns his own production company called B Square Productions. He's also has released several solo projects. I think I lost count at 18, 19. But he's also worked with mainstream artists such as Steven Tyler, Christina Aguilera, David Foster. These are artists that I'm extremely familiar with that are A-listers. But Sting, Amy Grant, Bela Fleck, Boney James, that we all know pretty much, Chris Botti, David Weckl, an awesome drummer, Deam Martin, Donny Osmond, and Kenny G, and it goes on and on and on and on. So at this time, I want to go ahead and welcome Brian Bromberg on the Bully Resistance Show. Brian, thanks for coming on the show.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
You know, Brian, I have to say this before we get go any further. When I got a message from you, I honestly, I didn't think that you were actually going to go ahead and first of all message me back. I followed your career for about 15 years, me being in this smooth jazz business myself. And when I got the message from you, I've been looking forward ending this interview, and I think. Again, this is just a big honor just to have you because you're just a phenomenal person as well as a talent. I've watched so many of your YouTube videos, and I'm more of a, even though I'm a trumpet player, I'm more of a bass drummer guy. And so which they fascinate me more so. But anyway, before we go any further, can you just give the audience just a little background of yourself? I mean, where you were born and raised and how you actually got started into music?
Yeah, of course. Well, first, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. I'm originally from Tucson, Arizona. Both of my parents were from New York, and they ended up moving out to Tucson in their early 20s. My father was in the Air Force, so he was stationed out there. And it was an interesting place to grow up. It was actually a great place to grow up because it's a really nice town, and it's a big enough town to have all the big city things, but it's a small enough town to feel like you're in a small town and a community. and I wouldn't call Tucson a mecca of jazz
right.
and creative music, but there's a really healthy, thriving scene there. And what was really cool about it for me was because it wasn't a huge city, there weren't a lot of musicians. The musicians that were there were actually pretty good. So guys like me could work all the time. If I was in a bigger city, I probably would have worked less. But because I grew up in a place like Tucson, it allowed me to play music every single day. And I was working every night. I was doing time, school, jamming, practicing. It was a really great, it was a good environment to be in because it allowed me to really hone my skills as a musician because I did everything there. I mean, I marched in parades. I played in the symphony. I played country gigs. I played rock gigs. I played jazz gigs. I played, Latin dance parties. I mean, I did everything you could possibly think of. My first professional gig, I was 12 years old, and I played in a Latin big band at this huge dance club in South Tucson from 9 to 4 in the morning. That was my first gig when I was 12 and a half, 13, on drum. So those experiences are just remarkable, and it comes from being in a place like that gives you that those kind of experiences. But even though I grew up in Tucson, my father was still a New York jazz musician. So I spent I spent a lot of time in Tucson listening to the greats and listening to all the masters and really getting clued into what jazz was about. And the thing that was cool is I'm the youngest of four, and because I have two sisters and an older brother, my older brother's a jazz drummer, but my sisters are just normal girls growing up in America. So I would listen to the Beatles and Crosby, Stills and Jimi Hendrix, and I'd listen to everything you could listen to back in those days. Joni Mitchell, Laura Nyro, Wow. So my musical background is kind of everything of growing up in a house that was half normal and also half very committed to jazz. So it was a really great way to grow up. Let's put it that way.
Well, you so you have a couple. You have four brothers and sisters. So you're saying that two of them still are playing music? Are they still involved in music then?
Well, my brother's a drummer and he still plays when he can. But neither one of my sisters are involved in music. Okay. So it was the three boys played music and then the three girls in the family didn't. Okay. But one of my sisters is a modern dancer. She actually is faculty at a university. Wow. So, art was always a very big part of our family and in our world. So it was a very creative way to grow up. It was very cool.
Now, are your parents still living?
No, they're both gone.
I tell you what, not to get sidetracked. I'm in a family of 7 brothers and sisters, and back in the day, of course, back in the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family, I'm sure that you remember those shows. We traveled as a family group, and we all played an instrument. My dad was actually just a professional singer, and anyway, I've been actually going through last week. My dad went to a. This has nothing to do with the interview, but it just has to do with our parents, how much of an influence they have on me. But he actually had like a basic surgery to get a kidney stone out. But he almost died because he went into septic shock where bacteria took over his body. And we were just actually sitting down this morning, and he said, well, how's your podcast? And I said, well, Dad, I've been doing it actually for a little over a year. I said, I'll be interviewing a guy by the name of Brian Bromberg. And so we started talking about you and your accomplishments and everything else. And we were watching the videos, and he's just beside himself. I mean, here's my thing. There's so many musicians out there. I was actually online, and it was actually a statistic. It said, let me read this real quick. It said a national arts education study has shown that American students in middle and high school music and theater programs are bullied more often than non-art students. It said that female music and theater students face is 41% greater or more, 41% more in regards to bullying. And then male music and theater students faced up to 69% greater risk of being bullied than their peers. That being said, why do you think kids that are involved in music and theater are more prone of being bullied?
Well, I mean, there's many different facets of that. One thing that I will say is, for me, growing up, I was quite overweight,
right?
And so I was like the fat kid. So you bring up the Partridge Family. I was Danny Bonaducci, except I was fatter. The thing is when you grow up and you're in an environment where you already stick out of the crowd because you're fat, but I also played the bass. So here's the fat kid with the big bass.
Wow.
I was the perfect target, and plus for me personally, I never really fit into, this is a weird thing to say. It's like I never really fit into secular society, because I started working professionally so young, and most of my friends were my brother's friends who were 10 years older than me. And, when you're working, I mean, I was working 4 nights a week when I was 13.
Wow.
And everybody that I hung out with was in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s,
mm-hmm.
While I was 13,
Right.
And I worked in bars and I worked in clubs. So I had this weird dual life. In the daytime, I would try to fit into school with peers and kids my own age, but they treated me like crap and would pick on me and all this kind of stuff. And at night, I'd be hanging out with the adults, and I guess I was gifted and talented, so they kind of revered me in a way.
Sure.
And, I was smart enough to speak to them like an adult and not a kid. So I got a lot of attention and I got a lot of respect from the adults, right, where the kids didn't treat me that way. And it was a very difficult way. It was very difficult to try to find a balance between that. But, kids are cruel, mm-hmm. It's like the weak, to feel strong, have to pick on the weak. Right. And the only way they can make themselves feel good is to put somebody else down or to pick on somebody. And when you're a fat kid with the bass, it was really easy to be picked on and teased. And I was also more of an artist. I mean, again, if you're into theater and you're into music, you're more into art than you are football.
Sure.
Or, other normal things, and especially macho things. You're mm-hmm. not, it's not that I wasn't, it's not that I didn't like football and didn't like sports and things like that, but I was a musician. I was an artist. I mean, I practiced 5 to 8 hours a day for half my life, so I was already committed to my music very young, and that was what was most important to me. And then I would try to find a balance outside of that to play and do things normal with a couple friends or whatever, but I never really fit in. So when your whole focus in life is going down a path that your peers in school can't relate to, they don't know what to do with you. And if you're the fat kid, they pick on you and they tease you.
Let me ask you this.
It was weird,
Yeah, let me ask you this. In regards to the days and that you were being bullied, was it the same kids that bullied you, or was it just a variety of kids that just because, that you were a bass player, musician, and everything else? I mean, was it just a selective amount of kids, or was it pretty much anybody?
I think the kids that were bullies and that were very unhappy, miserable kids, probably because they were very unhappy, miserable humans in their own families and
right.
life,
mm-hmm.
those people tend to pick on others. And it was multiple different people, but it was usually the same group of multiple different people. Even though whether they were related or not didn't matter. It was more like, if you're a bully, you're a bully. It just doesn't matter.
Right.
You're going to pick on somebody. Most everybody would just leave me alone. And then, I had a couple friends, not very many, just because I was different. Mm-hmm. And then those that are bullies, I'm sure treated other people badly as well.
Right.
So
right.
That's who they are. So, it's like there's two kinds of people in this world. There's good people and there's bad people. If you're bad people, you're pretty much going to treat everybody the same way,
You're
So
right.
I was the perfect target, sensitive, artistic, emotional, and fat. I was perfect because I wasn't a dude's dude. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So let me ask you this. So do you feel that, and this is just a question I was just thinking, do you feel that kids bring the bullying from their home, from their parents? I mean, it could be their parents might not be getting along, or they might see their dad, bully their mom, or mom bullying their dad. Do you feel like they bring that trait to school, bullying people?
I think when you're a child, you're a sponge, and if you grow up in an environment that's unhealthy, you bring that into everything you do in life.
Right.
So if your father abuses your mother, or your mother abuses her children, or if there's no communication, or if it's very simple minds or lack of respect at home, that's what you grow up with. That becomes who you are for the most part. And then you bring that to school, and you look for others that you can manipulate, take advantage of, or abuse, because that's all you know, because that's all you see on a daily basis. It's a shame. The kids, we grow up, from day one, we come out, we're a zero unprogrammed hard drive.
Right.
Our environment makes us who we are. You don't grow up being a racist. You're
right.
taught how to be racist. You don't grow up being anti-Semitic. You're taught to be anti-Semitic.
Exactly.
So the thing is all these kids come out, and everybody has a shot. Everybody's got the same, you're an unprogrammed computer. Your environment makes you who you are. So in these cases, when you've got these kids that grow up and have troubles at home, they bring those troubles to school, and that's who they become. And it's a shame. They don't deserve it, but they're in it. There's nothing they can do about it until they hopefully grow up enough to realize that they have an issue, and they deal with it and conquer it themselves.
So let me ask you this, one more question about you being bullied. What kind of bullying was it? Was it more verbal bullying because of your weight, or was it physical, or what kind of bullying was it?
It was both. It was physical. Yeah. It was teasing. It was, the whole spectrum. And finally, I just got so tired of it. I went and took karate, and there was one kid in school that used to pick on me all the time in homeroom. Every time the teacher would walk out, he would get physically abusive with me. And one day, he had like a jeans jacket, but it had metal buttons on it.
Right.
And he like whipped it on me and hit me in the head with it. And he hit it really hard, and I just snapped.
Wow.
And I just hit him once, and that was it.
So you took, here's my take. And
I had to defend myself, and he was sleeping after I hit him, and it never happened again.
You know what, Brian? They said that 85% of all bullying that takes place, and I've repeated this on several of the shows, 85% of all the bullying that takes place, there's no intervention. And what that means is that when I first heard that, I thought, okay, obviously the teachers aren't getting involved, the administration is not getting involved, the parents aren't getting involved. But what's happening is that as I'm getting more involved in this over the years, it's kids aren't telling their parents, kids aren't telling the teachers or anything else, and so really it relies on them. And I teach a kids jiu-jitsu class, and a lot of those kids, especially in my area, have been bullied, and you can tell by the look is that they're really to themselves, they're really bashful, but once they start taking martial arts or jiu-jitsu, their confidence was just boosted up, and then they started walking down the hallway with their heads up high and everything else, and it was a totally different game. You know what I mean?
All it takes is one person messing with them, and they defend themselves, and then it stops. And it's a shame that it has to go that way. The problem is that the intervention, the teachers aren't going to do anything. They're going to say what they do, and the kids do it. The kids don't stop.
Right.
You can say something, it's not going to stop. The parents are oblivious because they don't really care.
Right.
The parents of the bully kids, they're going to talk to their kids, but, they're usually a product of the parents. So, most of the time, in my experience, their attitude, he's my son, he's perfect. You're the one that screwed up.
Yeah.
It's like they'll defend the bully. So there is no intervention. The only thing you can do is defend yourself.
Right.
And it's a shame that it has to come to that point, but, that's what you have to do. And I would say most of the time when you do that, the bullying stops, because people push as far as they can until there's pushback.
Right.
So
exactly.
you're going to keep taking and taking until somebody stops you from taking.
Right.
And People who are bullied usually allow themselves to be bullied because they're not fighters. They're usually quiet. They're usually sensitive. They're usually introverted, and they allow themselves to be pushed around because they don't want to stand up to it until you snap. And that's not a good thing. But if that's what it takes to defend yourself, then that's what you have to do. Unfortunately, that's not a very healthy way to live. But what are you going to do? You have to defend yourself. And if you do, then you draw a line, and people take until they can't take anymore. And you have to draw that line once you're bullied too much.
But it's
a hard place to be.
Right. But in regards to as musicians like we were, I started playing music when I was 9. I wasn't outgoing. I wasn't, a social life. I mean, I was to myself. I hated conflict. I still hate conflict. But do you think that most musicians are like that, though, introverts?
I think it depends on the music you play. But I think for me, in my experience, especially being more of a jazz player, you can't reach the level of musicianship and excellence on your instrument that you want to achieve unless you put in the time and the due diligence to do it.
Right.
You have to be so serious about what you do. When you play jazz, it's not because you're not doing it for fun. You're not doing it to meet girls. You're not doing it for partying. You're not doing it for money. You're doing it because you love the music and you love the art, and you're doing it for the relationship between you and your instrument. To do it at that level, you have to be so dedicated to your instrument, into your music. That's why there are very few people that reach that top level, because they have to give everything of who they are and have whatever degree of God-given talent sprinkled on it as well to take you to the next level.
Right.
But people who do that are usually very introverted, because let's face it, playing an instrument, and especially playing jazz, is a very introverted music. It is a very myopic, very self-centered music. It's all about you doing what you do at the moment that you're doing it. Right. It's very, very introverted. So a lot of jazz musicians aren't necessarily very outgoing because of that. It's like for me, I was incredibly introverted and very shy, and a lot of it was because I was overweight and was insecure, but a lot of it too was because it's who I was as a person, because of what my music was for me. And when I first started doing my own gigs as a band leader, which just kind of happened, it was never really a goal of mine, it just kind of happened, I was petrified because I was a very shy person. So I was scared to death to talk to people and to be on a microphone in front of an audience. I mean, I couldn't even swallow. My mouth was so dry. It really scared me, But once I got comfortable with it, it helped me become more extroverted and not introverted, and it allowed me to come out of my shell as a person that all those years of being picked on and teased put me in. That allowed me to come out of it, and it was a long process, but it really helped me grow as a person and get more confident within myself.
Right.
I didn't really have that confidence as a musician. I knew I could play, but I didn't really know how good I got young and how much I did accomplish. It didn't really connect and didn't really click. But once I finally started being more confident within myself, losing weight, not being insecure about my looks, and then learning how to talk to an audience and communicating, it helped me come out of my shell. That all that bullying and being teased for the first part of my life really locked me in that room. Thank God I was able to get out of that, but It took a lot to get out.
Well, Brian, let me ask you this. So, what would you tell someone that's being bullied? If you come across like a kid that just told you his story that he was being bullied, what kind of advice would you give him?
Well, at this stage of my life, the first thing that I would ask is, why does he think he was being bullied? What makes him a target? Like, why is he being picked on, and who's picking on him, and why?
Right.
And I would ask him to look and try to rationalize why and address those reasons of why you're being picked on.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that he's the victim. I'm sorry. It doesn't mean that it's his fault. I'm just saying I want to know if, for me, I knew why I was being picked on. I was the fat kid with the bass who was introverted and artistic. I didn't fit into anything in Tucson, Arizona.
Right.
So I knew why I was being picked on. I want to know from somebody who's being bullied now, why are you being bullied? What do you wear? What do you do? What do you say? How do you talk? Are you 4 feet tall? Are you 9 feet tall? What about you makes you a target? And then I would ask them to try to look at that target and see if there's something that they can do within themselves to have more confidence and strength to rise above that.
Okay.
On the flip side, I would also say they need to develop the confidence and the strength to defend themselves.
Well, see,
and they have to defend themselves and draw that line so people stop taking. People stop taking when you don't allow them to take. They have to learn how to draw that line, and that's a hard one. But I think the balance of those two things will have them, learn self-defense and physical activity and develop strength and confidence that way. And the other half is looking at it intellectually and emotionally and looking at themselves and just go, what makes me a target? Why am I being picked on? Who's the kind of person that's picking on me, and why?
Okay, well,
try to analyze who the bully is.
Well, let me mention this, not to interrupt you, Brian. They're saying that over 90% of bullying takes place is because of somebody's appearance. Okay, it's the way they look, the way they dress. If they're too tall, too short, too heavy, just like yourself. So we know the majority of his appearance. So since it was an appearance with you, so what now? Again, tell me what you did to stop it. Was that when you took up karate and then you sort of were the aggressor, and then word got around, okay, let's don't mess with Bromberg anymore because, he can fight, he's going to stand up for himself. Is that what happened? But you said that you got, I'm thinking, but you got bullied throughout your whole school life pretty much, right?
Elementary, junior high, and high school. Okay.
So I mean, how did you deal with it when it was dealing with your weight then?
Well, when I was really young and didn't really have the maturity or the ownership of my intellect and my self-confidence to make changes in my life, what I ended up, the first thing I did was take martial arts, and the first thing I did was learn how to defend myself.
Okay.
That was the first thing, and thank God I only had to use it once in my life, but that made a difference because when I used it, it stopped, and that was it. And word got around, so that was the first thing. The second thing, what really made a difference for me was when I saw pictures of myself playing or pictures of myself on stage or pictures of myself next to other people, and I truly could see how fat I was.
Right.
And when I didn't really realize it until I saw pictures of me seeing the fat roll over the belt over the side of my pants, or seeing my 3 chins and seeing that kind of stuff. And when I saw that, it was, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, and this was about myself, but when I saw that, I was repulsed with myself.
Sure.
It's like I allowed myself to look like this, and then I had to try to figure out why I allowed myself to look like that. And it took a long time for me to get the strength and the confidence to lose the weight, but I did, and I lost it very quickly. I was very committed to it, and that changed my life.
Wow.
So for me, when I saw, I could tell by how I looked as, number one, it made me feel bad about myself, but I could also see that, especially for kids looking for weakness, and you see the fat kid, it was really easy to be teased and picked on. Had I not been a fat kid, I might not have been teased and picked on in my life, but I was the fat kid. I was a target. I was the fat kid in class. There was only one, me. Had I not gained that weight, I probably wouldn't have been bullied.
Right.
So that was something that I could have changed, but it took me a long time to get the strength and the confidence to change it.
Now, did your parents know that you were being bullied?
Yes.
Did they do anything, or how did they handle it?
Oh, they talked to teachers, they talked to the principal, my sisters, my brother, we talked to the people, that were doing it. But nobody did anything. Nobody
Sure.
knew what to do.
Yeah.
This was in the 60s and the 70s. Nobody knew what to do.
See, here's the deal is that I get messages all the time, and from parents saying, David, we've gone to the teacher. where this bullying takes place. We've gone to the parents of the bully. We've gone to the administration, and it seems, and they're saying it seems to be good for a while, and then things start picking up again. And what's happening is it seems like there's more lawsuits that are taking place. So they actually, like the state of Michigan, what they're doing is that if bullying persists, then the parents are going to get fined, because obviously they don't have any control over their kids, which whatever works is fine.
And that's what needs to happen. That's great. I mean, if the kid doesn't stop, you kick him out of school.
Right.
Make him pay the price. If he still continues, you censure the parents.
Right.
There's a responsibility with being a parent, and you have to have that responsibility. If you can't, there's a problem, and they need to pay the price for it.
Right. And
I said, 90% of all human behavior is learned at home and in their environment. So back in those days that never happened, but that's what should happen.
Right.
Is the kid needs to be punished, and if the kid continues to doing it, the parents need to be punished.
Right. I totally agree. Let me ask you this. One last question, and we'll go ahead and take a break. If the tables were turned and you were a parent of a child that was similar to you when you were young, what would you do as a parent to try to stop the bullying?
For me, it was very tangible for me, because I was artistic, I played music, I was sensitive, I was introverted, and I was fat. So for me, it was blatantly obvious that I am a walking target. So if I'm the parent of that kid, the first thing I would do is try to say to the child, first of all, if it's my child, I'm responsible for what I feed that child.
Right.
If the child is overeating, then why is the child overeating, and where is the child overeating? Is he overeating at home, or is he overeating at school? And the first thing I would do is try to help that child lose the weight and feel good about themselves. And I guarantee you that if the fat kid loses the weight, the bullying is going to stop.
Yeah, agree.
And just like I said, had I not been fat, I probably would not have been teased and picked on in my life. I was the fat kid in class. I was teased and picked on. So, I know that my parents used to try to help me with it, but back in those days, there weren't the tools and the resources available like there are now, So, but that would be the first thing that I would do. If I was my child, I would very much direct all of my energies into helping me lose weight, so I didn't stick out like a sore thumb, because I was a walking target.
Right. Well, Brian, if you don't mind, I want to go ahead and just take a few minutes and recognize the sponsors, and also let the listeners know how they can help support the Bully Resistance Show. And then when we come back, I want to go ahead and talk more about your career in music. That's next.
Sure.
The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Nathan Alfred Insurance, an independent insurance agency located in Vienna, West Virginia. They specialize in auto, home, life, and business insurance. And what makes this agency unique is your ability to shop the market. The Bully Resistance Show is brought to you by Planet Fitness. You can come and check out their new and improved Planet Fitness. Now, I'm a member of Planet Fitness, and they have all new strength equipment. They have tanning beds, rowing machines, and so much more. Starting at just $10 a month, you can join Planet Fitness, home of the judgment-free zone, where members experience a hassle-free, non-intimidating environment. So please, see club or visit planetfitness.com for more information. Now, you can help support the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells as low as $1 per month. You can go to www.patreon.com/Bully Resistance Show. That's www.p as in Paul, A, T as in Tom, REON as in Nancy.com/Bully Resistance Show. So for more information, go to www.davebond.org. That's www.davebond.org. Thanks for tuning back into the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. My name is David, and today we've been talking with Brian Bromberg, who is a professional bass player, producer. He has been around and has been extremely successful. And we're going to go ahead and we were talking about bullying, but I want to go ahead and this part of the show talk more about his career. Brian, we were talking at the very beginning of the show, extremely how talented you are, and you're one of the very versatile players, which means you can play any genre from traditional jazz to, contemporary and everything else. So you've played with, like I mentioned, Steven Tyler, Christina Aguilera, and also people like Michael Buble. And it's just, all these styles of music. I know this. I know that I majored in trumpet performance as a classical artist. And so going from classical the classical to the jazz, it was extremely difficult because I was so used to reading the notes. And then later in life, maybe about, I've been actually on the road 18 years, and I do during the school year, I spend about 90% of my time going into the schools and talking about bullying. But my kind of playing is, it's just like gospel, and it's just, it's really not tough. And I was taking private lessons for the longest time, and I went to my instructor, and I said, listen, I would like to learn jazz. And he asked me, why do you want to do that? And I said, well, I'm going to get into more of the smooth jazz. And I think jazz or bebop is such a totally foreign kind of music. And I think I'm just not good at it. I'm not good at, matter of fact, and I don't mean to go off on tangents. My wife tells me I have ADD, ADHD, whatever. But I was watching a video of you, Brian, with, you were with, Eric Darius, Michael Langton. You were at like a KSBR, venue and everything else. And you guys were, doing a song that is real familiar with everybody, and everybody was taking certain licks. You guys were extremely phenomenal with the ideas that you were coming up with playing. And did you always prefer jazz like that, or were you trained as a classical artist, or because you mentioned that you were with the cello, right?
Yeah, the way it started for me musically, from the beginning was, my father was a drummer, my brother's a drummer, so I grew up in a house of drums. So when I was 2.5 years old, I started, beating up the furniture and pots and pans and everything else, just like, a
Sure.
typical normal kid, and then I started learning how to play the drums, and that was my instrument, and I was actually quite gifted at it. And if I were to practice drums now for 6 months, I'd be a much better drummer than bass player. In fact, I played drums on several of my last records. It was my first instrument, and it's home for me. But because of my parents and who they were, being artistic and conscientious, one of the things that they said to me was like, why don't you learn another instrument that's completely, diametrically opposed to drums, something that's melodic, something that's totally different, just so you have a different musical experience. So they suggested cello, because you can't get any more, diametrically opposed to drums than cello. Mm. So I started cello in fourth grade. And, cello is a beautiful instrument. It's gorgeous, but it never felt part of my hands, and I was always terrible at it and really despised playing it, even though I love it. It just wasn't me. And so I ended up, the orchestra director, and by the time I got to high school or junior high, I think it was junior high school, I was playing cello in the junior high orchestra, and I was terrible. And basically the orchestra director said, hey, Brian, you see that big bass over there? Why don't you play that bass? We don't have any bass players in the orchestra. And I know that was his way of telling me I'd much rather have one bad bass player than listening to you try to saw your cello in half,
Sure.
So it was like the bass. It's this big, I don't want to play the bass. It's like, it was just like, who the hell wanted to play the bass,
Right.
Until I went home and talked to my dad and my brother, and they said, yeah, he wants me to play the bass. And they were like, wow, do it, man. He goes, if you play bass, you can play jazz and we can play together. It was just like, oh, wow, that's cool. I didn't even think of that. So the next day I became a bass player. It was like, that was it.
So how old were you then?
I was 13 or 14.
And then how long did
14
you
maybe?
How long did you, when you got to the bass, I mean, how long did you practice and how often?
Well, here's the thing. So when I got the bass, what happened to me is that it happened incredibly naturally and very quickly. And what I realized was that the bass was the perfect blend of everything rhythmically with the drums, because the bass, you keep the time. I mean, the bass is the truly the center of any rhythm section. It's not the drummer, it's the bass player, because you keep the time, but you also are the harmonic foundation of the music. So the bass player does two things at the same time. You define the chord changes and the harmony, and you also define the rhythm and the groove and the tempo and everything else.
Right.
Well, I already had the time and the groove and the feel from playing drums. What I didn't know is I didn't know that I actually had the melody in me. Because being a terrible cello player, I had no idea that I actually had melody in me.
Okay.
So when I picked up the bass, it happened very naturally. And once I started connecting with it, that was it. I played every woken moment I possibly could. I mean, I'd come home from school and play until dinner, then I'd play after dinner. And honestly, between the fact that it was rewarding for me and being picked on and teased at school, I just started ditching classes and practicing, and I basically just dropped out of high school. I tested out, and my parents let me do that. They said, you can quit, but test out, because I was already working many nights a week as a professional, and I was already really good. So I tested out of school, and all I did was practice. So I literally played hours a day from the ages, from 15 on. And I honestly, when I look back on it, I'm kind of blown away, but I got good enough from age 15 to 18 that when I was 18 is when I got recommended to Stan Getz's quintet, the legendary jazz saxophone player. So I got that good in 3 years, and I had no idea that I could even play that well. I just didn't have a clue sitting in Tucson, Arizona. I had no idea. Okay. But, that's how good I got, because that's how dedicated I was. I literally played day and night, and that was my life. I just put I put every ounce of who I was into my music. I wasn't trying to meet girls. I wasn't being stupid. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't partying. I practiced music, and the thing, like I said, earlier, that was one of the beautiful things about being in Tucson, is that I played every possible type of gig. So because of playing in the orchestra, I learned how to read notes, and I played in the orchestra. I love classical music. I was really seriously into classical music. I loved it. Right. But then I'd play every other kind of gig known to man. But the thing about jazz to me was the freedom of the improvisation and the fact that I could sing through my instrument. Right. It's the fact that I could close my eyes and play from my soul. It's kind of like a direct connection to God and the universe. Right. I'm not looking at music. I'm not thinking of anything else other than what I'm trying to say as a spirit. And that's the thing about jazz to me that separates it from all of the music, is because you have to have the knowledge of classical musicians. You need to be able to read. You need to know where the notes are. You need to know your instrument well enough that when you hear something or feel something, you know where to put your finger to play it. Right. So that's why the jazz musicians are considered the greatest musicians in the world, because you have to have every skill that a classical musician has, but you also have to be able to improvise on the spot and know the chord changes and the theory and harmony, and also be able to sing and hear the melody instantaneously, and to be able to do that with others at the same time. I love that, and that's what to me separates jazz musicians from other musicians. Doesn't mean that they're better in ways. It just means that you have to have that degree of relationship with the music and your instrument to play it at the highest level.
Right. Now let's fast forward about 20, 30, 40 years. Now that you're as good as you get, or good as you are, do you still, I guess, practice as much now than you did before, or if you do, I mean, if you do still practice, I mean, what do you practice on when you know pretty much everything?
Well, first of all, you never stop growing until the day you leave this planet. You never get as good as you can be. You got to remember that every instrument can be played better than we can play it. So that never changes and never stops. You get to a point of a level of expertise on your instrument where I play every day. Most of the time it's for maintenance, to keep my strength up, my endurance up, my calluses, to keep my physical ability on my instrument. I write music on my instrument. When I have performances coming up, I spend more time working through the music, making sure I remember my own music.
Right, sure.
I've written a lot of music. Sometimes, you record something and you don't play it for 6 months or a year. You forget your own music,
Sure.
So I got to remember what the heck I wrote, So there's two different kinds of practice. There's maintenance practice where you're just doing the physical work, just like exercise, to keep the strength and endurance up. And then there's the musical practice where you're actually working on things musically, whether it's scales or just different types of things where you're working on the music or on the harmony or something, where you're truly, you're truly focusing on what you are practicing versus just focusing on playing. Those
Right.
are two different things.
Right.
So when you're younger and you have less responsibility in life, you can put more time into practicing.
Right.
When you're older and you have other responsibilities in life, you don't have the time. Plus, there's other things in your life that you have interest in: relationships, family, children, animals, whatever.
Sure.
You put time into other things that are meaningful in your life, and you constantly find that battle between, you spend your whole life dedicating yourself to be at a certain level. You have to keep that level up. On the flip side, you want to enjoy other facets of life. So
Right.
It's always a challenge to find that balance between the two.
Right. Your latest CD is Thicker Than Water. And what I want to go ahead and do, I want to play a track, actually your main song, Thicker Than Water. Is that going out on ads, you said today? Is that correct?
Today is the actual ad day for radio. So basically the single went out to radio stations probably last week or so, or the first of the year, and radio stations will, they listen to it and then they add it to their format. Hopefully, and today's the first ad day that they actually, that they add it. And what you want is you want all the stations to add it the same day. Then you're number one most added in the country, and it's great. There's so much music available. It's really hard to get on stations in the first place.
Right.
But there's no way all the stations are going to add it the first day. So you spend the next month or two, with stations adding it here and there. But usually the first day you get a bunch of ads, because it's your new single. My last one, the song called Coupe de Ville, I was blessed it was number one on Billboard. So
Wow.
The fact that we had a hit means radio is going to take this track more seriously,
Definitely.
And this track is completely different from the first single, but just as accessible. In fact, it might even be more accessible, actually.
Right.
So, we have high expectations for it, but, the one thing I've learned is you can't ever second guess anything in this industry. It's, you just don't know what's going to hit, what's not going to hit. So
Right.
I'll just have another track out there.
So let's go ahead and play this one track, and then when we come back, I just want you to walk us through the whole process. I actually how you put this track together, from the name of the track to how you actually pick the artist to be on the track, and then that's when we come back. So that's next. So, Brian, tell us how you came about Thicker Than Water, the name, and how you actually started putting this track together.
Well, this track is a really unique track for me on a number of levels. One is I co-wrote it with my nephew Zach, and what's really cool about this tune is, you know, he sends me, he does like vibes and grooves. He does a lot of stuff on the computer, and he's into more hip hop and R&B and rap and you know, funkier stuff and much more modern type of pop music and groove stuff. And he'll send me some stuff to check out. And, you know, I'm a jazz guy. I mean, I am a songwriter, I am a producer, I am an arranger, so I can basically work with anything and any style of music. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to instrumental music is very specific because some songs really work for instrumental music and some don't.
Sure.
And it's just kind of its own thing. So, you know, over the years, he sent me lots of different tunes, and they're very cool for somebody to rap on, or they're very cool to be a chill vibe or something like that, but they don't have the ingredients that work for an instrumental, you know, contemporary jazz song, which is a very specific thing. When he sent me the vibe for this song, and I've heard that first keyboard intro, the way this song starts, it's just like, holy crap, this is amazing. You know, just like, it was like, bam, it just like blew me away. And I was so inspired by the vibe that he came up with and the sound of it that I immediately like went into the studio. I mean, immediately. I just heard it and went in the studio and wrote the song in like 10 minutes. I just, you know, so he came up with the vibe, and then all the melody and all the form and structure was me. So he came up with the hook and the vibe and the sound and the feel and the tempo and the groove. And then I went in and wrote all the melodies and created the song form out of it and turned it into a song that works for instrumental contemporary jazz. And then you know, I'm a bass player, but I play a lot of bass that sounds like guitar. I play a lot of piccolo bass. In fact, the radio edit of this song features the guitar sound, not the bass sound very much. So the radio edit's totally different because commercial radio really doesn't want to play bass melodies and bass solos. So what I do is I take songs, I record them on the record the way I want to do them as a bass player and as a solo artist, and then I will do edits after the fact to make it work for radio because of what will and won't work on radio. So when you listen to the song, when you listen to the radio edit version of the song, I sound like a guitar player. When you listen to the record version of the song, I sound like a bass player, just because of the way I produced it. But so, you know, he came up with the basic vibe and groove and sound and tempo. I did all the rest and made the song out of it, and then I played the different basses and the different vibe, and then I wanted sax on it, so I sent it to my buddy Najee, and he played sax on it, and he lives in Florida, so I told him what I wanted and where I wanted, sent him the music. He played on it in Florida, sent it back to me. I edited it and did everything together, you know, put it all together, and you know, made a song out of it. It was we tracked it in my home studio, so the drums were cut in my studio. Obviously, I played bass. You know, Zach did all the computer stuff, and then I had Tom Zink, who plays keyboards with me, add some keyboard parts to what Zach had programmed, and put the sax on it, and it sounds like a song when it's done. Wow,
that is amazing. You know, one of the questions that I have as an artist, you know, and it's sort of when somebody says, well, when did you come out with your latest CD? And I would tell them it's been like 2 or 3 years. And they said, why don't you come out with another CD? And honestly, Brian, because of smooth jazz, the ups and downs that they've been going through and the way people buy and they don't buy anymore. And then, you know, I make most of my money on the road, selling CDs, and my CD sales are, you know, not as nearly what they were, you know, 5 years ago. And it's hard for me to justify, you know, putting out another CD. And I was talking with Steve Oliver, and I asked him the same things. I said, well, how can you get your, you know, return from your money? I mean, or the money that you actually put into the CD. And his thing was, well, you know, it's all about streaming now. It's, you know, it's always nice to be on the charts, you know, and that's one of the reasons why we do it. It's, but how do you justify coming out? I mean, as a producer, Brian, you can go ahead and put out CDs all day long because you're a producer. You're a extremely talented musician. You do pretty much all the parts. You know all the people and everything else. But for somebody like myself, it seems like how can I justify coming out with another CD then? I guess that's my question.
Well, there's first of all, everything that you just said to me, we all go through exactly the same thing, maybe at a different level, but it's no different for us as it is for you. The industry has changed. Mm-hmm. I mean, the industry has changed. The delivery mechanism of music has changed. The way you purchase music has changed. The way the way you buy it, the way you listen to it, how you sell it, how you make it. Everything has changed. Mm-hmm. That does not mean that you don't want to make the music. That doesn't mean that the fans don't want to hear the music. Doesn't mean that you don't want to play the music. The biggest challenge for everyone, you, me, Steve Oliver, everyone, is how do you monetize it? And the same with record companies.
Right.
There are fewer companies now than ever before because they don't make money anymore because people don't buy music. Mm-hmm. Streaming in one aspect is the kiss of death for the music industry because a person has no incentive to buy a record anymore. You don't have to buy a record anymore. You can listen to it whenever you want, as many times as you want on any device you want now. Why buy it? So it's changed. Now, when you have a CD and you do a gig in a club, you can sell the CD, and that's something that streaming doesn't do. If somebody's there and they like your performance or like your music or they want your CD or they want you to sign it, you can't do that over a computer. You can only do that in person,
Right.
So the only thing that I would say is that, you make a CD because you want to. I never started making records because I thought I was going to be famous. I never thought I started making records because I thought I was going to be rich. It was the last thing on my mind. I didn't even think I'd play on a record, let alone make my own when I was young growing up. I thought all of that was unattainable for me. Sure. I had no idea that this is what I'd be doing. It's what I wanted to do, but I never thought about it. All I wanted to do was just be a jazz bass player. Nothing else mattered, And then I found myself writing, arranging, and producing, and I found myself, I have a record deal. I found myself like, okay, my life is completely different from what I thought it was going to be, but I'm going to go along for the ride. It just kind of. But the key is you do it because you want to do it. You do it because you feel you have something to say and something to contribute.
Right.
That's why you do it. And if it gives you joy and happiness and you can hopefully make a few bucks in the process, then you find a way to make it happen if it's important to you. But you got to remember, if you're going to make a record, it's because you've got something to say and it means something to you. You're not doing it to be a star. You're not doing it to make $1 million. You're not doing it for any other reason than you just want to play and you want to make a great record because it's who you are and it's what you do and you want to be able to do that. Everything else that happens from that is a bonus. So don't let it discourage you from doing it if you want to do it and you feel you've got something to contribute and it's something you want to do. The biggest challenge, which only you can answer, which is no different for me or anyone else, is how much money is it going to cost for me to make the kind of record that I want to make? Right. And if you go into it thinking that you're going to get your money back, then you're mistaken. You have to make the best record you can with whatever resources you feel comfortable putting together, and whatever happens, happens. But you can't go into it thinking, I have to sell X number of units to get myself paid back. It's like, you're not doing it for that. You're doing it because you love it and this is what you want to do. If you're fortunate enough to get your money back, then that's a blessing. So don't let it stop you from making the music. It's just the problem is that a lot of people don't have the financial freedom to just go in and make a record,
Right.
And the thing is you can make a record for $10,000. You can make a record for $100,000. Which one's going to sound better?
Yeah.
So it's like, most people can't spend $100,000 on a record. A lot of people can't even spend $10,000 on a record.
Right.
So the key is you figure out what resources you can come up with, and then you find a way to make it as good as you possibly can. And that's all you can do. And it's no different for you in your next project and me in my next project.
Right.
It's like, how much is it going to cost for me to do what I want to do, and am I ever going to get that money back?
Right.
And the answer is it's going to cost more than I want to spend, and the answer is no, I will never get that money back. But is it rewarding? Of course it's rewarding.
Right.
It's a little different for me because I'm on a record company and I have a record deal. but the money, the record is still paid for. You know, they give me money to make records because they take it out of my royalties. But let me tell you something. I add a lot of my own money on top of these records because my budgets aren't big enough to make a record. I mean, Thicker Than Water sounds like $1 million in the jazz world. That's because I put a lot of my own money into it because I didn't have enough money to make the record I wanted to make. As an artist, I'm not going to cut corners. I'm going to make the record I want to make, and I'm going to try to do I'm going to try to be as real and as respectful of the music as possible. And you know, to me, I have a little saying within myself: good enough is never good enough.
Right.
You need to know how far to push and when to stop. But I'm not going to settle for something that's not as good as it can be. I would rather spend my own money or take out a loan or do something to make it as good as I can make it so I can go to sleep at night feeling good about the work I did. The last thing in the world I want to do is do something and regret the choices that I made for the rest of my life every time I listen to a song going, I shouldn't have done that. I should have gone the extra mile and I didn't, and now I have to live with this for the rest of my life, you know? Well,
Brian, before we wrap things up, how can people connect with you? I mean, through the website, Facebook, do you do Instagram? How do they connect with you?
I'm just getting on Instagram, learning how to use it. So that until I learn how to use it, I'm not great on Instagram. I mean, I have several pages on Facebook. You know, my website is brianbromberg.net. People can reach me there, and I'm all over Facebook. You know, so that's the you know, those are the best places to do it. I'm readily available when I have time and I can communicate. I always try to communicate with everybody, and you know, it's really, you know, I feel very fortunate that I get to play music and record it at a very high level with really great people. And right. No matter what I do, when I surround myself with people that are great, they always make it better than I can make it on my own. And that's the beauty of creative music, is sharing it with other people and helping take it to the next level. It's just wonderful to be able to do that.
Well, that's awesome. Well, that's about all we have for the Bully Resistance Show with David Wells. Before we go, I want to thank you, Brian, for coming on the show, for just telling us your story about your school days and being bullied, and also about the music industry and your whole journey there. But also, I want to let the sponsors just know, and also the listeners, if you haven't actually subscribed to the show, you can actually go to www.davebond.org and you can subscribe there. So until next time, thanks for listening.